welcome today. It's really great to have you guys here. We are filming this just for the people who couldn't make it, so we'll share the link with them and with you guys. So the idea of a media roundtable is that it should actually be an informal discussion. Through the years, things have changed and evolved, so we've become more events focused. So there's a presentation and everything, but this is not a Dev by PowerPoint presentation. It's really a discussion. So we've got people who will tell you stuff, but the idea is that they engage with you and you can interrupt and you can ask them questions and chat. I don't know if you know, this is Momentum Investments. Our slogan, payoff line is, with us, investing is personal. So that's the idea. We want this to also be personal. So please ask questions and interrupt and make it your own as well. I'm not going to have a long, I know we're behind time, but we'll make up for it.
Come in. Come in.
Sorry,
I had to make an entrance, I'm sorry.
So my name is Esther Karlatz. I'm the head of PR for Momentum Investments, and Tobile Shongwe, she's the actual head of PR for Momentum Investments. She deals with us, with you guys as well, and then we've got Charles from MSL that you speak to more often. But we want you to see our faces as well, so that you know who you're dealing with. And if you have a quick question, we don't want you to go through, first having to phone someone and then they make an appointment and then we're busy. If you want to get hold of us, Tobile or I will be there, so you can just tell me whatever the question is. Good. So this morning I'll introduce the panel, the people, the pointy heads and the clever ones. I'm very honored to sit at this table. But for now we'll just start with Dan. I'm sure everyone knows Dan. He is famous. He's like our guru in the group. He's also the media elder, so he knows media. Dan is also with ENTA. I'll quickly read his bio. But if you look in your gift, that's Dan's book. He'll speak about that this morning. But let me just, before I hand over to Dan, so just let me read some of his bio. So Dan is a seasoned news reporter, an editor of diverse newsrooms. Dan has developed a diplomatic, constructive, professional engagement style, but it's also warm. And Dan is just a wonderful person. I was lucky to have him as my mentor for a little while, and it was absolutely fantastic. Dan has a fabulous story to tell, and it's partly in his book, I think. But his media experience stretches back to 1980. I don't know where you guys were then, but anyway, it was quite a while ago, so he is experienced. That experience gives him access to high-level media channels and key stakeholders, even government, public and private sectors, things that areas that we don't ever get to. Dan has worked for radio and television stations, starting in Mozambique, then South Africa and the UK as a full-time and freelance journalist since 1980. And then since 2013, he was a news anchor on ENCA. Still is. Dan is presenting or chatting to us now. Afterwards, he will have to leave because he has a full-time job at ENCA. But anyway, thank you, Dan. It's lovely to have you with us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Esther. Thank you very much for this opportunity, just to share a little bit about my story. I was chuckling as you were reading my bio of what is part of my bio, and then I was reminded about something that was mentioned about me. When you were saying, you said what diplomatic and what. Peter Bruce, he is a veteran South African journalist and known to many. I'm sure Victoria, you know Peter Bruce. At the height of our first lockdown, the hard lockdown, because it was in March 2020, the harshest lockdown. So, but in May, and there was a whole issue about cigarettes and smoking. So I made a comment on air about it, and Peter Bruce took a little bit kind of this is not the right comment. So he wrote this. I'm just going to read it. You can find it online. He says here, ENCA news anchor Dan Monyane is one of the nicest guys in journalism. I always watch him if I spot him on the screen because he's cool and collected, and I know I could never do that with a camera pointing at me. Now, if a guy like Peter Bruce, who's been around and is a hardcore journalist, describes me as one of the nicest journalists and I'm cool and collected, I take that. So when you said diplomatic, I said, yes, so it's good to hear that. Because even Peter Bruce agrees. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to chat a bit about myself and my story. One of the questions I get asked the most is, why did I write my book, this book? And people look at it and they see Rihanna, they see the title. They say, I don't want to die, but the guy is alive. How can he talk about death? I had a presentation I do, but I'm not going to speak to it. I don't know if it's around. Just go to just carry on. I won't start there. Yeah, carry on. That's the title of the book. Carry on.
That's Dan when he was young.
Now, that's the only picture of me that was taken by an uncle of mine on my 10th birthday. That was in 1969. I was 10 years old, and my father, as you read in the book, was a guy who really liked to dress himself well, three-piece suits and stuff. And a laborer he was. He had worked in the mines, but he was also a self-taught tailor. So he appreciated, material and cloth and textiles. He knew everything. So he made sure that even his 10-year-old boy wears properly for his birthday with a bow tie. I don't like bow ties, by the way, but that's me then. So the genesis of my book, simply, as you read from the beginning, is the realization that most of us, we have, all of us, in fact, not most, all of us have a story. We all have a story. But sometimes we don't think our story matters, but it does. So your story matters, Fareeya, your story matters, and Victoria, your story matters. So everybody's story matters, but we don't talk about it, or we don't write about it, or we don't leave it on or pass it on. My parents, my mom was born of a mixed race family. She was mixed race, so we say in South Africa, colored, born in Knysna. And she had a grandfather who was Dutch and who was Khoisan, and a Cape Malay father. My father was Stonga man, Shangaan man, strong guy from the central regions of Mozambique, and he came to South Africa in 1929 to work in the mines as a young man of 16. But they never wrote about the story. They used to tell us at home, and me when I asked questions, but where are you from? What are you doing? What happened? Why did you never went to school? When I realized my parents never went to school. But that rich heritage, the story of their lives, a young man who's 16 years old walking across the bush and sleeping with the lions and making his way to the mines in Johannesburg then, it's like, wow, for me it's like, how did you do that? But that's not, that's not recorded. Morning, that's not recorded. So as I say,
move the slides again.
Yeah, and so forth. Thank you. So as I say quickly in my book, I had this curious mind. So I used to ask my parents stories, and then I was inspired by a quote by a Nigerian writer, Chinua Achebe. I was doing an interview for my small YouTube channel in 2020, as encouraged by my youngest son, who's 22, to say, now the world is shut down, you must use the digital platforms to talk. So I set up a YouTube channel, very simple YouTube channel. Then I was interviewed one of South Africa's well-known marketers, and he's an African kind, Afrocentric guy, and he very believes in Africa, Tebe Ikalafeng. And then he tells me, he says, and he reminds me of this Chinua Achebe quote that says, and I start with it in the book in my preface, and I'm going to read it now. It says, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Now, if the lions don't have somebody to write their stories, it's only going to come from the hunter side. So all of us have story, and our story matters. So if I don't tell the story of my identity, where I come from, how I grew up, what happened to me, and part of it, who's going to tell it? In today's world of digital media and social media, somebody might, but they'll have their own narrative around it, okay, which I may agree or not agree. with. So I decided, no, it's better for me to put down in my own way. So my book is actually part memoir and part legacy. It's not a history lesson. It's really a simple thing to say, what do I leave behind? My story, the story of my mom and my dad, for example, and their parents is being told through me in a way, but it's only tiny. I can't do justice to it. So it's really to say, I wrote this book so that in future, the children of my children, I don't have any grandchildren yet, but I mean, if I do one day get blessed with that, but the future, they'll have my lived and a written account of my lived experiences. That's really what has driven me to do this book. So, as a 10-year-old with this kind of background, I grew up in a home where my father consumed radio a lot. So it was in the old days in the township, in the corner of your lounge, of your dining room, small house, you had a speaker, and it was belonging to the then Radio Bantu, and it had only two channels. You had Nguni, Zulu, or you had Sesotho. So you could choose only one of those two, and in the township. So it was always on the Zulu one, and it started in the morning at 5 o'clock with the cock crowing and waking up everybody, and then there was just a station, no volume. So it comes on, you're sleeping, you wake up, this thing, and then there's a cock crowing in the middle of that room and stuff, and then the show starts, and then it ended just about 9 o'clock at night with the playing of the stem, and that was how it ended on radio those days, and so I grew up in a home where there was radio, and as things changed, my father had a small transistor radio. I don't know if some young people will know what is a transistor radio. Sorry. I'm a dinosaur, so I come from that time. So it's just, it says those different frequencies. There was no FM those days. There was AM, medium wave, or shortwave. And then we crackling of the sound and stuff. So we would listen there. And then when there was FM, there was Springbok Radio, there was Radio South Africa, and we get the news. The biggest story in 1969 when I was 10 was the landing of the moon, the reported landing of the moon of the American astronauts. So I was so curious about it, and I used to ask my mother, but I look at the moon, where are these people on the moon? Literally, I would lie on the grass, a patch of grass in the backyard of our little yard in Soweto, and try and, on the clear sky and clear nights, try and look at the moon and say, maybe I'll see Neil Armstrong or somebody there. Exactly, how amusing. But that didn't happen. But I was driven by this curiosity to know. So much so, in that year, I even joined the local library at White City Jabavu in Soweto. And I would go then and start reading the kiddies' books and stuff like that. And my father encouraged me to do so. My dad, although he never went to school, by the time I went to sub A, I knew the alphabet. He made sure I knew the alphabet. He worked at an Afrikaans language medium school in Melville, Urban Liar School. So he would bring these cards that they were using to teach the kids there and teach me at home. So he created in my mind that thirst for knowledge and education. So I went to a library. So I had to feed my curious mind. But lying there on the grass, and as I grew older and getting to becoming a teenager, there's a voice that tells me, how sad would it be for you, me, to have been born and lived here, and only die having been known only to my folks, my neighbors, my friends, and maybe my schoolmates. There must be something bigger in life, in this world. There has to be a bigger issue. But I was not rationalizing it as a young boy, the way I'm expressing it now, obviously, but it grew with me. That inner voice was there, and it guiding me through this period. So it was really around that issue of curiosity and this voice that said to me, but you have to do more than just be here and then you're gone, and it guided me. So I grew up then, and that was my 10-year-old, and this picture was taken on the 3rd of August 1978, on my birthday, okay? I'm sorry, I used to smoke, I apologize, but you can see the smoke. I used to smoke Peter Stuyvesant. That was my favorite cigarette, and my parents didn't know that I smoked, and thankfully my teeth never became yellow, and my nails never became yellow. So I could hide it, but I'm sure my dad could smell it, but he never said anything. So that was me on my birthday in 1978. This is after 1976. The picture there is around my birthday. Okay, and I mentioned this story. I relate this incident in my book around the story. I was a teenager then, and I was part of the June 16, 1976 uprising in Soweto. I was at Maurice Isaacson High School, one of the schools that led that march, and I'm wearing that blazer there. Although I was no longer at Maurice Isaacson High School in 78, I was elsewhere. So the point is that one of the things that one becomes aware of is that in life, for you to do things that mean something to you, each and every one of us, it takes a little bit of bravery, okay? By the time I was 19, I had to leave the country because the apartheid security police were looking for me at the time. And so my home had been raided. I was no longer staying at home. As part of the student body and staff, I was one of the people in front there in that march, in that picture there. The guy in front was pointing out was a close mate of mine at school, and he was poisoned in Maputo when we were in exile by an apartheid agent, and he died in Maputo. Okay, Sam Pinda, that's his name. So it took a lot of that as well. So you got a mix of curiosity in you. This is me. I've got a mix of curiosity. I've got these voices talking to me about having a meaningful life, and then you are part of this movement that's happening in the country. And we're all young. We're kids. I was what? How old was I in 1976? I was 17. I was born in 59. I was 17. But June, I was not 17. I was still 16. Because August had not come around, okay? So we're all kids, so to speak. We're young, but we're brave. There's a lot of purpose and stuff. But the whole thing was driven that there must be something better, you know? After my home was raided once and the police caught me and interrogated me and thankfully left me, the guys from John Foster Square at the time, which is Joburg thing, the Joburg Central Police Station today. I thought, no, I don't want to die. I'm still young, so I got really scared. I mean, you get scared, you're young, and many people had been killed, people had gone to exile in my community. So the only way I had to leave, because I had this hope that there's more to do going forward. So that drove me, and I ended up in exile in Mozambique, where I stayed and lived there for 12 years, from 1979 until 1991. And I had to learn to adapt very quickly. That's another the lesson, sort of, I say, in the different parts, in the chapters of my life. As you read the book, you get. I had to adapt. I had to learn a new language, Portuguese, you know. And my dream, growing up, like most young South Africans, maybe today even, I don't know, but at the time, because there were so few career opportunities if you were Black South African in the country at the time, one of them that was still available even was becoming a doctor. So I used to dream to be a pediatrician. You know, I think I would have made a lousy children's doctor, but that was a dream, and I could not do that. So I had to adapt as well and say, what do I do? Okay, so I get to Mozambique. I'm 19 years old, and I don't have a piece of paper to prove it. I didn't do matric. I did O-levels by correspondence with the University of London at the time through a college in town, because my father was very clear. He said he never went to school. My mom never went to school. He said, what do you do? You get matric. He said, I don't care what you do with your politics and you're throwing stones, making petrol bombs, you will get your matric. Because in this family, in his line of family, there's nobody with any kind of qualification, stuff like that. So he made sure that I went to this correspondence college, which was funded by the SACET Trust, South African Council for Higher Education Trust at the time. And then they linked us up with the University of London, and the fees were very tiny and small. So I get to Mozambique. I don't have that certificate. I had written my exams. The police raided my home 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks after I had written my exams, and I do not know whether I've passed, I've failed, nothing. So I get to Mozambique. I had to adapt. So my entrance into media from 1980 was by chance. It was a question of livelihood, Victoria. I needed to find a place to say, how do I now make money to buy some soap and stuff like that. It was very tough. So I had to adapt. And what I did, and I relate this in the book, was a simple thing. I used to write poetry, but it was more like slogans, so to speak, a collection of slogans and poetry and stuff. And one of the news magazines in Mozambique, the main one, was called Tempo. I just took the courage and I went there. And I said, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm from Soweto, I've got a poem. Because they used to publish poems in the back. But I can't write Portuguese, it's in English. I said, no, we'll translate it. And I met this guy, Zé Batista, a young white Mozambican. He said, no, I'll translate it for you. He did, and it was published in September of 1979. And we became friends. And then he introduced me to a buddy of his where he was staying, one of Mozambique's veteran journalists, Fernando Lima. He's still alive today. And then they introduced me into the media. And I was employed as an intern way back in March 1980. By June, I was working for the English service of Radio Mozambique. That's how I got into that. So I had to adapt very quickly and learn new things and stuff like that. So part of that story is shared in my book. And so I come back home in 1991. So the ANC is unbanned, PAC is unbanned, Communist Party is unbanned, and 2nd February 1990, famous speech by de Klerk and Madiba, and all of them are being released from prison. The world changes. We are in Mozambique with my family now. I have a young family by then, and we are thinking, okay, what to do? And I remember the day Madiba walked out of Victor Verster prison, I looked at my wife and said, I'm going home. I'm going back home. This is after 12 years. So now you come back home. You left as a 19-year-old student in Soweto. Nobody really knows you. And this is my thing that's driving me. I want to do more. It's really about making a difference. And that's what I'm beginning to realize. So I had the confidence to say, when I come back, I will then I'll work in media, but I was not going to go to the SAPC at the time because it was still managed and controlled by the Nationalist Party, and together at the time with a very strong link to the Afrikaner bond at the time, okay? And that we were very much aware of that. So I said, I'm not going to go there. But I had got to know about 702. That's why I put that picture there. When I was in Mozambique from 1985, I was promoted to deputy head of the English service, and I started being a stringer as well for the BBC World Service, their Focus on Africa program. So they got to know me, 702, through that. When I left the country 702 didn't exist. 702 was born in 1980, and it was born as a music station at the time. So I come back, there's this 702, then I get to meet them, and then it was an opportunity for me to grab and to say I can get back into the country and start working in it. I was very clear in my mind what I wanted to do in terms of working for an independent media, not work for a government media. I'd worked for public broadcaster for 12 years. It was Radio Mozambique's English service. In a one-party state, Mozambique was a one-party state under Frelimo at the time. They also transitioned to multi-party democracy the same time as us, 1994. They also had their first elections of multi-party democracy in 1994. Before then, it was different. So the other important point that comes through in my book is about the importance of connection. Because throughout, I had different people who had made an impact on my life. I mentioned one guy whom I met through a poem, a Mozambican journalist, who then introduced me to another community. And that community, some of them today have remained connected to. So very important that we get a sense of the connection. So that's really a kind of a high level summary of my book. What has led me to do it. I'm hoping I'm giving you a sense of really what it's about. So I always say we all have a story. Your story matters, by the way, and we all have a story. Whether we tell it to somebody, whether we write a book or not, I think it's important to know that you also can do these things, and you can all do them. And that's what I try to impart when I talk about my book, to say, don't stop being curious. Don't stop being curious in your life. If you're not curious, try to be curious about something. It's not about anything. Just whatever tickles your fancy, as they say, Paul. Just be curious, And we all have an inner voice. We all have an inner voice, but we have two voices. There's that one that says, Fareeya, go for it, and that one that says, Aisha, you're gonna do this. Who's gonna help you and stuff. So listen to the other. Always listen to the one that says, go for it, and stuff like that. And so therefore you have to be brave and trust yourself. And what was it, P.W. Botha who said adapt or die, but he never adapted?
Right.
I think it was a famous speech. He said that speech, but it's important that you adapt in life, about anything, about wherever you are as you grow older, and I'll talk about that just now. And just have the confidence. Most of the challenges that we face in life, sometimes we rob ourselves of confidence. We think we're not good enough. I might not do it and stuff like that. And when I was writing this book and recollecting so many things, I realized that without knowing it at the time as I was younger, I actually took enough time to have confidence that, no, it's going to be okay. Sometimes I didn't even have all the answers. Neither do I do sometimes today. And opportunities came around, and embracing them and finding a way to maximize them for yourself and the people around you. And of course, the importance of connection. So I try to live by this myself, that it's important to empower others and serving this love. Or the other way of putting it is in the book. With the book, I've realized that I know myself now. I mean, I'm going to be 63 in August, so I should know myself. So I do know myself now even better than before, but because of that, I have to do that I am to the best of my ability. Why? For the benefit of others. It's not about myself. Because if it is about yourself, then it doesn't really work. So for me, it's a choice that I've made, and the next chapter for me, going forward for the rest of my life, is to I realize I've been called to be significant. So it's to live a life of significance, meaningful in whatever I do, and I've realized when people give me feedback about myself, that I actually inspire people. But I don't wake up in the morning and say I'm going to inspire people. I wake up every morning and say I must be the best of being me, for the benefit of others. That's what I try and do. And of course, creativity. Okay, one thing you'll read in the book. I know, Rihanna, you're going to read my book, and Victoria, I challenge you to read my book. It's about creativity. Creativity. I mean, I used to make music, and I write about my experience at the Rugby World Cup in '95 with Shosholoza, when I did the unofficial version of the Shosholoza CD, and being there at Ellis Park and teaching 60,000 beer-swelling crowd, predominantly white, how to sing Shosholoza, just 1 hour before kickoff, meeting Francois Pinard and Sean Fitzpatrick from the All Blacks and John Alom with them and stuff. And I talk about that because it was just a moment. I thought, wow. But you don't realize at the time. It's goosebump at the time, and you think back at the wow. But I had to do that, My first song in Mozambique was a hit. I was number one for weeks and things, but I was doing it under a pseudonym because I had to use a pseudonym when I was in exile. And the other point I realized that I've got one, when you share, Esther said I was her mentor. So it's about educational. There's an educational element to our lives. So people ask me sometimes to say, oh, okay, but then when are you going to retire? So I tell them two stories about that. The first story is one that I relate is an event that happened to me straight on, face to face. The other one is what I heard. And it's two individuals, and some of you may know them, but one of them is known to all of us in the room here. And he was preparing now to retire and say he's done, and he was winding down his work in Johannesburg, and he's going to go back to his village and settle there. And at that period, it's October 2008, I get a phone call from Zelda Lichansi. She says to me, the old man wants to see you to say goodbye to you and the family. I said, but I'm at work and the kids are at school. I said, okay, fine. Who can say no to go and see Madiba? So I said, okay, great. Thank you very much, Zelda. We had met Madiba before, but that particular moment, he was seeing various people. He wanted to say, I'm going to Kunu now, I'm done here. You remember he had retired twice in public. The first time he retired, he kept on working. And then the second time, that was the time. So I got there and stuff. So in the discussion, we were there for 40 minutes. He's talking to the kids, talking to my wife and stuff. He said to me, Dan, I don't think if I had come out of prison and not become president, I'll still be alive. So I said, what do you mean? He said, no, because my brain stayed active for a long time. I was busy, lots of issues and stuff. So he says to me, keep your brain active for as long as you can. So get involved in stuff. Don't stop because you say I'm old or whatever. So let nothing stop you. So I thought, wow, thank you very much. So I carry that with me. So I ain't stopping anytime any soon because you have to keep the brain active, otherwise you die. He said to me he's going to go to Kun. One of the things he was going to do, he said to me, I'm going to be reading newspapers, I'm going to be watching television news to make sure that I'm aware and everything, what is happening. The second one is about Dr. Maponya, one of South Africa's businessmen. He died a couple of years ago. Actually, it was just before he passed away in 2020, in January, just before Corona hit our shores. And when he turned 90, he was interviewed by ENCA. At his memorial, which I covered for the ENCA News Channel, they played a clip for him when he was interviewed at the age 90. And he was asked by this journalist who says, so, Dr. Maponya, when are you going to retire? I mean, the guy is 90. He says, retire and do what? Sit at home and die. He said, I'm going to die with my bootstraps on. Literally. 2 weeks before his death, he was in hospital, just before Christmas. And then 2 weeks before his death, a week or 10 days or so, he called a board meeting of his companies and every CEO to say, what are your plans for 2020? And they were saying, but Baba, you're not well, you just came out of hospital. He says, no, we've got work to do. And then he did that. So when I think about those two men who were iconic in our country in terms of their journeys and paths, I'm looking at myself, I'm thinking, I ain't stopping anytime now. So how do you keep going? When I turned 50, I spoke to a life coach to say, in 10 years' time, I'm supposed to retire. You're going to be 60. So what do I do between now and when I'm 60? I have to keep going. I'm going to keep working and stuff like that. I have a small retirement fund there. Yes, it is with momentum. That's that, but momentum. and I'm thinking, so what am I going to do? She said, no, the world is now like this. This was a coach. You have to find a portfolio of stuff to do. I think there's a new word for it. There must be new parts. So you don't do one thing. Try and do different things. And since I was 26 years old, I've always done different things. I worked for Radio Mozambique's English service. That was my full-time job. In 1985, I was the deputy head of that service. I was stringing, as we used to call it, stringing for the BEEB, the BBC, Focus on Africa. I used to give monthly talks to the foreign NGOs in Maputo, wanted to know what's happening, current affairs, type of people. And it was, I used to get money from that. It was not just for free. I used to make music and stuff like that. And I was a young active in the ANC at the time, as an ANC youth, with information and culture and stuff like that. So I did more than one thing. So at the time when I had that session where I tell you, I was mainly doing one thing. I was like, when was this? I was like just employed in 1999. I was the station manager at 702. So I was just doing one thing. Then I realized the future is going to have to be different and over the years and stuff. So I started again doing more than one thing. Even today, I don't do one thing. I do different things because that helps you. Because you keep your mind. Because mental well-being is as important as your financial status as you get older. And many of us, speaking for myself, you're never ever ready financially to say, I'm done. And I started working in South Africa when I was 32 in 1991. So the first years of my life in Mozambique, earning a salary, it was you get the salary, you spend the salary, and then you work. When you come to South Africa, first time I heard of life policy was in 1991. When I came back to South Africa, and I was at 702. And Chris Gibbons, who was the head of news, said to me, do you have a life policy? I said, what is that? He said, think about it. You've got two small kids and what. So I started thinking about it at late age because I was introduced to this new world like that. So it's important to find the right kind of balance for you, what works for you and stuff like that. And where I'm at now, I'm in a space that says, if I'm called to be significant, inspirational, creative, educational, I just have to keep on going for as long as I can, and hopefully the rest comes. But mindset-wise, I'm not in the mindset of saying, I'm 63 and I'm done. It's always a transition for me, that what is next? What are you doing? As long as you're healthy and capable, of course, there is more that one can do. And I'm sure there are all kinds of possible ways of you, individually, we're all in different stages of our lives, of how you can manage that. Esther.
That you talk.
I've spoken too long.
We don't want you to stop.
I've spoken too long.
Isn't it just wonderful to listen to Dan? Dan, thank you so much. I think what Dan speaks about is his amazing life, but telling the story is important, and I think that's what journalists do. You all tell the story, and we all have a story to tell. Thanks, Dan, but we don't always tell it. And a big role that you play is getting the message out there. So what has Dan got to do with retirement? His retirement age. He could have sat at home and did nothing. But Dan chooses every day still to change the world and have an impact. And I think that's super important. And why we want to land that message also. Once again, with us, investment is personal. We can't give you money and forget that you're a person at the end of it. So it's super important to realize these things. If you retire, it's not just about having money. Of course, it's about that, but it's also about having a life. And we, but we'll talk about that more now. The behavior behind it, the way we think, we really want to investigate that, and that's why we want. Do you want to say something more?
I was saying, I mean, if somebody wanted to ask me one question, I'm willing to do so before I leave, because I'm going to be leaving shortly. Or when somebody wants to give me a remark or a comment, I'm willing to
I've got a question, Dan. What was your pseudonym?
Read the book. No, my pseudonym was Leo Mtembu. Yeah, my first story I covered was for the Mozambique News Agency, early 1980. And my editor at the time is the late Carlos Cardozo, a Mozambican journalist who was assassinated about 20 or so years ago in Mozambique while writing about corruption with Frelimo in Mozambique. And because of the way I had left the country, and he studied at Wits University, and he was deported by the apartheid regime as an activist. He was part of the student movement at Wits University and the SRC as well, the SRC board. So he said to me, we said this is a risk, and I spoke to him, because now you're going to be reporting and you're going to be talking. We can't say you're going out there and then you use your name, okay? Everybody who grew up with me in the township doesn't call me Dan, because people use my African name, because my full name is Daniel Tsakani Monyane. So everybody, when I grew up, called me Tsakani. But now, to say Tsakani, you use that, people will know where I was. But also in Portuguese, Tsakani sounds more like another word in Portuguese, okay? Which is Sakani. Sakana in English means bastard. So I didn't want to risk, thank you. I didn't want to risk mispronunciations as well. So we had to settle with a pseudonym. Now I'm born in August, so I chose Leo. Remember, I'm a teenager, so we still read horoscopes these days. I don't read them anymore, but So why are you laughing? It's true. It's a true story. I'm young, I'm a teenager and stuff. So Leo is the month, is the lion. And lion is my favorite animal, as it happens. Mtembu, there was a South African boxing coach, and he also used to write. His name, I think he's late now, Theo Mtembu. And when I was growing up, before I left the country, on the back pages of the Weekend World or the Rand Daily Mail newspaper at the time, and in the sports pages, and when they were writing, and in the World, what was it called? The Bantu World at the time, the newspaper. Then it changed. Today's Sowetan used to be called the Bantu World. Then it changed to the World, the Weekend World. He used to write, and I used to love his reading his stories. So I thought, and he was in the media. He was a boxing guy, but he used to make opinions. So I said, Leo Mtembu. Thank you.
I'll ask a question.
Yes, Victoria.
You said on your slides, be brave, hope, and adapt. What gives you hope about the future in South Africa?
A simple answer. We can unpack it if we had time. I've realized recently that there is a new movement in the country. There's a rise of active citizenship. It's happening in pockets. Okay, was it last week when we had a march of residents from Soweto to the office of the mayor, Dr. Mpho Palace in Johannesburg? Did you see any political party there? There were residents. Yes, they may have voted for a political party. They may even be members of political parties, but they all united as residents, gogos and mkulus, uncles and aunts and young people, leading them and saying, please help us, Mayor, to get electricity in Soweto. We want to pay, but when we pay, sometimes we don't even get it. So can you help us? And they said to Dr. Mpho Palace that we know you're coming from the DA, but we're not here because you're DA. We're here because you're our mayor. You're the mayor of Johannesburg. If you help us. Just as one example, if you look at how people are responding to state capture, the reports that have come out, and people are saying, we want accountability, we want consequences. People are doing it not on behalf of a party or anybody. So for me, what gives me hope today is that if active citizenship carries on and people make their voices heard and they put the pressure, things will change. If you look at the results of the local government elections last year, 1st of November, how many independents for the first time won? Even in smaller towns like Barberton in Mpumalanga, where the ANC's majority was reduced. And people are saying, no, but we are here. Our consensus must be here. So that gives me hope, because we can't put our hope for the future solely in the hands of politicians. It can't be. We have to put our hope in ourselves as people to say, how do we change this? And you have a lot of young people who are doing so now. And your colleague, I don't know if you know Songezo Zibi, was editor of Business Day until recently. He's left. He just wrote a book the other day called The Manifesto. He launched it 2 weeks ago. He's 46 years old, and he believes that he's old. We need 30-something-year-olds to come up more and more. But people like him are saying, no, South Africa, the future has to be different. We have to imagine it differently. The fact that there's conversations around that, the fact that there's people who are actually doing things about it and taking action and coming together as residents gives me hope.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the support. And remember, I mean, whatever, who says whatever, your story matters. All of us. Sorry?
We can.
I think wasn't Dan just so inspirational? Yeah. Anyway, so for me, I always love hearing his story. And now we've talked about the softer side. We are going to talk about the financial side of retiring, but we are still approaching it from a softer angle. And softer, I mean the human side of it. And that's why all these actuaries here, brilliant people, I'll tell you exactly what their names are and their bios. They've done lots of research on behavioral science. So what it is, like how people think, how people act. We think we know. And sometimes we know and we still don't act on the right things. So what can we as a business do to make retirement better for our clients and for the world out there? Okay, cool. So this is Martiens Barnard, Paul Nixon, Fareeya Adam. Martiens will start. He is also presenting a white paper soon at the actuarial convention.
Yeah.
Is that right? The white paper we'll share with you guys as well. So you are the very first people in the world to hear about some of the insights in there, but we'll share it with you afterwards. And then Martiens will take over, so I'll stop talking. Martiens will lead the discussion. It's about how do people think, how do people act, how do people react, and what's needed in the world. Fareeya is the head of product for Momentum Investments, and we've developed a fantastic new innovative retirement product that combines the best of both worlds, but she'll tell you about it. So please ask questions. I told them they can have their presentations and then you can ask more questions. But if something doesn't make sense while they're presenting, the idea is that this is a discussion. It's not a death by PowerPoint, like I said earlier. Okay, comfortable with that. Martiens, thank you. I'm just going to say who you are. Martiens is the head of technical marketing at Momentum Investments, and he's been with the company since 2013. Before that, Martiens worked in banking and life insurance industry, so he's got a vast experience and background. In both instances, there was a strong actuary by profession, and the author of the white paper that I told you about, Secure in Risk. But Martiens will tell you about that. Then Fareeya, next to me, has a BCom Honours in Actuarial Science at the University of Pretoria, and she also qualified as an actuary through the Institute of Actuaries in the UK. She has been with Momentum for more than 17 years. I know you look too young, but anyway. Current role, Head of Product Solutions at Momentum Investments, and her experience in the product development area. She has the most of your experiences there, and then also in corporate actuarial. She serves as a trustee on the board of the Momentum Retirement Funds and helps with the education arm of the Actuarial Society of South Africa. Fareeya is also a person, she's 3 children, interests reading and interior design. Martiens also has three.
My wife was pregnant twice, but we've got 3. So yeah.
Three. Sorry, a twin and another little. But it's cute when Martiens has an online meeting. They sometimes pop up on his Slack. So it's okay. Then over to Paul. He's our original pointy head. He's the head of behavioural finance at Momentum Investments. He established an applied behavioral finance capability after experiencing client and advisor behavior for 20 years with various institutions and in South Africa, insurers in South Africa, and Barclays Bank in London also. Paul holds an MBA with distinction from Edinburgh Business School and recently completed a master's degree, also with a distinction, where he researched risk behavior at Stellenbosch University. Paul is a brilliant presenter and he has stories to tell, but he's also a contributing author on neuroeconomics to theories and practices in financial therapy, and is a registered member of the Swiss-based Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists, where he co-leads the Middle East and Africa region. So that's quite a mouthful, like you can hear, I can't even say that. So very impressive people, but over to you, Martiens, and thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Hello, everyone, and welcome here to the start of the financial section of the media roundtable. I wanted to make a joke to start off to say Paul knows what you're going to do before you do it. That's basically what he aims to do in his career. But let me just quickly talk to you about our session today. I'll start off with to have a very brief explanation about the current retirement landscape, where after Fareeya will take over to talk about our new solution. And then after that, between myself and Paul and Fareeya, we'll talk about it a little bit more, what that actually means. I want to make the point that, since we've launched the product, I've spoken to various individuals within the company. From one of the investment professionals that's been with the company for many years that I've always looked up to, that understand investments very well. I've spoken to a professor that does a lot of investment work for us from Cape Town. And both of them, once they've seen the solution and they've seen some of the outcomes that we've shown in the white paper, the reaction wasn't just, oh, it's interesting. The reaction was, we are going to change the way that we're retiring. We always thought about it in a certain way, but now once we've seen this and we've seen what this can actually mean for us, we're going to change the way we're retiring. So it's a message we want to get out there to people that there's a new way of doing things, and whether you still do it in the old way, it's fine, but do consider this, because this might just be a game changer for your retirement. So to talk about the current landscape, I think it's important to understand that there's really two income vehicles that you can buy when you reach retirement. So let's say you reach retirement, you've got R1 million that you want to invest. Your two options are really, firstly, a living annuity, which is currently the more popular option in the market. On our platform, over time we saw about 9% of the flows going into the living annuity, but in the recent years that has reduced a bit. It's now about 70% going into living annuities, with 30% going into the other option, the life annuity, and probably because of all the market uncertainty, because in the life annuity there's a lot more certainty. I'll talk about that now. And each of these products have their pros and their cons. To briefly talk about the life annuity, I think it's important, and I really want just to emphasize before we start, that you know how these products work. I do trust you do know, but just a refresher if you haven't worked with these for a while. Okay, so a life annuity is like a promise. Now, I want to make it very practical. Assume now that I'm the life insurance company and you are the client. When you want to retire, you will come to me and I'll make a quote to you, and it's like a promise. Say, for the R1 million that you want to retire with, I will give you R7,000 per month, escalating at a certain rate until the day that you die. There's no fees, there's nothing. It's a promise between the life insurance company and the client. There's variations that you can choose, but it's really just built on that trust that you will get this income until the day that you die. Okay. The other option is the living annuity. I see I clicked on the clicker a little bit too early. And here, it's more your normal type of investment, where there's market risk. And effectively, here you need to think about the product in two parts. Okay? Because firstly, you've got that fund, a fund that you need to invest in, which normally would be something like a unit trust fund, whether it's a money market or a balanced fund or an equity fund or an offshore fund. And we show it there. I don't think that the picture is going to work. No, it won't. But it's that block there. And that's really where all the growth happens. The product, which is the product that we've designed, or it's our living annuity or the living annuity, is basically that surface. Now that determines the product rules. It tells you how much you can withdraw from the product. Okay, now in a living annuity, you can withdraw between 2.5% and 17.5%, but it's always that fight between how much does the fund grow and how much do you withdraw, because if you withdraw too much, that fund starts to shrink away. You can end up at the end of your lifetime running out of money. Okay, and then so basically I've explained the two products briefly before I hand over to Fareeya, or before we just look at a video of our new solution. But both of these products have pros and cons, and I think the important thing to understand is that in a living annuity, there are two main risks that retirees face. The one is longevity risk, meaning you live for a very long time and you may run out of income. And the other one is market risk, where markets don't perform as you want them to. And both of these risks are really out of our control. Okay, you can't really do anything about it. As I walked into the foyer now, I picked up our retirement book there in front, and the first question on page 1 is, how long am I going to live? Am I going to live till 100? No one knows. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to go into the video and then I'll hand over to Fareeya.
Having been a financial advisor for 40 years, I've met tons of people whom I've helped with their financial planning, which included retirement. And yes, there have been some challenges along the way, especially to match the right product with not only the needs of my clients, but also their personalities. So, let me tell you about the Smiths. I'd been Tom and Mary's advisor for about 3 years when I got a frantic call from Tom. There's 3 of them. Even though having the same parents, living in the same house, going to the same school, it was soon apparent that although identical, they were very, very, very different. Now, Greg, the oldest, was the daredevil, always in the wars, falling off his skateboard, and black eyes from playing rugby. No dare went unchallenged. George, the youngest, on the other hand, was always quite reserved, with a love for painting, an old conservative soul. And Gina was the deep thinker of the 3 and insisted on debating everything. Ever the kind-hearted, who wanted to fix everything. The boys used to call her Mini Mom, much to her irritation. In their teens, they all developed interests which reflected their personalities. Now, Greg's love for the outdoors led him to a career as a game ranger. George settled into being an artist, loving the security of illustrating children's books. Gina fulfilled her dream of becoming a doctor, but really loves being a mom. So when Tom asked that I meet with the gang, as he called them, to discuss their financial planning, it was really interesting, and soon became apparent that each saw the world and its risks very differently. They also had very different ideas of what the future will have in store for them. One day, when Greg retires, he'll want the flexibility to choose his income level and change it every year. He'd want his investment to be exposed to the ups and downs of the market, as he's excited by the prospect of growing his money. Now that's why he believes he will choose a living annuity. But he'll have to manage his underlying investment choice and the income he gets well, to make sure that he doesn't run out of money if he were to live longer than his parents did. He'd also want his children to inherit the balance of his investment when he passes away. George wouldn't want to worry about the ups and downs of the market, So he'll rather choose a life annuity when he retires. Even though the income he will receive cannot be changed later, he knows it will be guaranteed for as long as he lives. Now, George and his wife don't have children, and his wife has her own investments. So he isn't concerned that there'll be nothing to inherit from his life annuity when he passes away. When Gina retires, she'll want her money to give her the opportunity to participate in the growth of the market and the ability to choose her own level of income so that she can live a little. But she'll want a guaranteed income that can cover her life expenses for as long as she lives, should markets underperform. She's looking for something that can give her the best of both worlds, the certainty of a guaranteed income from a life annuity and the flexibility and potential market upside of a living annuity. At Momentum, we pride ourselves in being innovators and market leaders, having a solution for all. With the Momentum Retirement Income option, you don't have to choose between investment protection and growth. You can have the best of both in a unique solution to meet your personal needs with Momentum.
I like that I am the master of my own destiny. I like the peace of mind of a guaranteed income.
I love that I get the best of both worlds.
Okay, so I must say this is probably one of my favorite products that I've ever actually been involved in, just because there's so much involved in it. And every time we start having conversations with people, we really start to pick up more and more, and I hope you're also really going to enjoy it. So let me just see, where am I? Before we actually go into these slides, I want to just talk about something that Martiens also mentioned, that the split between living and life annuities in our market, what we've seen, and we believe that it is an industry trend, has really moved from the 90-10, 90% in living annuities, 10% in life annuities, to 70-30. Now, what does that really tell us? That tells us that people are starting to value certainty. And more importantly, over the COVID period, or at least the trend started a little bit before then and then really picked up in 2020, is where the market volatility and the impact that lower returns could have on future incomes started to impact living annuity clients very dramatically. And a lot of them became afraid, and Paul is going to tell you actually what happened to those clients. Now, if you think about what those circumstances did, is that it started creating the shift, right? Now, the video really talks quite clearly to what are the differences between these two things. And he talks about flexibility versus certainty. He talks about exposure to growth versus no exposure to growth. And Martiens also mentioned the two big risks, which is investment returns and longevity risk, right? Which are totally impossible to predict. And the third one you can think about a little bit is the inflation risk. But the biggest difference really between a living annuity and a life annuity is about who takes the risk. Now, in a life annuity, the client is effectively passing all of that risk to the life insurance company. It's saying, you as Momentum, you're promising to give me 10,000 Rand a month, it will increase at 5% per annum for as long as I live, and I don't take any of those risks on myself. Versus a life annuity, where a client is effectively taking on all of that risk. If investment markets do poorly, if inflation is higher than expected, if that client lives longer than what he expected he would live because of medical advances or anything else, genetics, all of those things are risks that client takes on his own.
Fareeya, just that's on the living annuity. Now, I'm not sure if you said life annuity. Just remember the difference between the two.
Life annuity, client outsources the risk. Living annuity, client takes on all the risk. And I think that's the big thing. Now, when we come to retirement, we actually ask ourselves, what's actually the need in retirement? And at Momentum, we believe that the need in retirement is really about matching expenses. So how do we currently think about it? We think about it as, I've been in a pension fund, I've been in a retirement annuity, Esther, and I accumulate this massive amount of money. People generally think in terms of this big lump sum. If I have 2 million rands, wow, that's a lot of money that I've saved up. What you should be thinking about is how that translates into an income, right? Now, if you actually start from the level of a client, what does a client really need in retirement? 3 categories of needs that we generally see clients having. We define them in this way. Life expenses is at the core. Now, your life expenses are the expenses that you can't do without. Whether you're in retirement, you must be certain that you can cover your medical aid, that you will have a place to live, that you will be able to cover your grocery bill. Those are the expenses that are generally fixed in nature. They will increase with inflation, but actually you can't afford not to make those expenses. Then comes the living expenses, which is all your nice to haves. It's the travel, it's the special life event that you want to save up for. Those are also important to a retired client, but they will also always come after you've covered your life expenses. Because it doesn't help that you're planning a trip but you can't meet your medical aid. And the third one, it's not really an expense, but it's almost a need that people have, and we hear about it quite a lot, and that's the need to leave an inheritance. Now, one of the key differences between a living annuity and a life annuity applies to that inheritance. Because if you pass away and you have a living annuity, the money that's remaining, that capital amount, is actually paid out to your beneficiaries. Whereas on a life annuity, there's usually no capital amount that's left. And people always think about that as, in a life annuity, I actually don't get anything back. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you mitigate that, but that is generally what people talk about. What we often see, though, is people overestimate that. They worry about the risk of dying early. If I die early, I lose my capital, therefore I want to invest in a living annuity. What they underestimate is the risk of living too long. Because if you live too long and you run out of money in a living annuity, it's actually what we call a negative inheritance. Because you become dependent on your children, on your family members, in order to help you meet those. So inheritance is always seen as this legacy you want to leave, but in fact, depending on how long you live and how you've saved and how you manage your expenses, it could become a negative in reality. So these are all the things that we think clients need to consider from a needs perspective in choosing a retirement income solution. Right. So that's what they should be doing. What actually happens? Actually, what it becomes is a balancing act. It's about saying, this is the amount that I have, this is how much I need to get every month. Let me just make this once-off decision. And that's also a key thing about retirement. Is if you retire, you reach the age of 65 or 62 or whatever age it is that you're retiring at, and suddenly you're faced with this massive decision that you have to make. It's like now, today, you have to decide, am I going in a life annuity, am I using a living annuity? With all of those pros and cons. When actually it's quite grey. Hey? Do any of us really know how that's going to play out? We don't. But suddenly, at retirement, when all of these massive changes are happening in our lives, we've stopped work after so many years, don't know what to do with our time, don't know if we have saved enough, and suddenly you have to make this decision. And it becomes this balancing act that clients actually take on. And I think it's a very high-pressured environment at that stage to have to make these big decisions. And critical point about a life annuity, once you go into it, you can't come out of it. So you make this decision and then, shoot, I don't know if it was the right decision or not, but that creates a lot of pressure for a client. Okay, so all of these things have actually contributed to how we've redesigned our solution, right? So what we have is we have a living annuity at Momentum. Typically, living annuities and life annuities are two separate products. What we've done is we've taken our living annuity and we've created a new component that you can buy inside the living annuity. And that's what you see at the bottom, this protected portion. We call it a guaranteed annuity portfolio. What it is, it's a life annuity. And a client can personalize it in terms of setting up a guaranteed term, annual increases, joint life income. So everybody clear on what those 3 terms mean? Or should I quickly cover it? Quickly cover it, okay. So a guaranteed term is a minimum period for which the income will always be paid. So if I choose, I go into a life annuity, I can say that I want a period of 20 years that my income must be paid. So whether or not the client passes away, if he passes away inside of that 20-year term, we will still continue to pay for the 20-year term up till then. So it creates this minimum period for which the income will be paid. Okay, that's the first one. Then increases. There's a range of increases. You can choose to have your income increase between 2.5% and 20% every year. right? And that is your hedge against inflation in a life annuity. You can also choose to take a CPI increase. And what you can expect is that if somebody chooses 0 increases, their income level will be higher, start at a higher level, and then stay flat. If they choose to add an increase of what they think inflation is going to be, let's say 5%, the income will start lower and then it will gradually increase, right? So that is actually left up to the client to say what is actually that starting income that he needs in order to accommodate that. And the third very important one is the joint life option. Now, it's not often seen as an inheritance, but actually it should be seen as an inheritance. If you take out a retirement income product and can secure the income for yourself, what a joint life allows me to do is add my spouse to that and say that that income must be paid for as long as either one of us is alive. So it's a way of taking care of your dependents in order to make sure that both of you are actually taken care of. Okay. Another guarantee terms can also be seen to a certain degree as a bit of an inheritance angle to it. Because if the client passes away within that guarantee term, the balance of the income that is payable for that period goes out to his dependents. So they can choose to continue to receive the income, or they can choose to capitalize and receive a once-off amount, but it's also to a certain degree meets that need for an inheritance.
Okay, maybe just to interrupt and to just, I believe it has crystallized, just to re-emphasize it. So if I retire and I've got 2 million rand, in the past my options was go life annuity and I get income for life, or I go living annuity and I choose funds, various unit trusts or share portfolios and things, and then I'm completely dependent on what markets does, whether they perform well or badly. And what we've done now is where you could have chosen 3 or 4 funds or how many funds in the past, we've now said one of those components that you can choose is now our guaranteed annuity portfolio. And you can structure that guaranteed annuity portfolio according to what Fareeya has spoken about now, all those escalations and terms and the joint life to really suit your need in terms of your family setup and what you want as a client.
But equally important is that within that same contract, you've got the growth portion. I am going to stand now, sorry. So this is one component in the living annuity. That, the growth portion, where you can invest in unit trusts, personal share portfolios, model portfolios, that is all the same functionality that a living annuity always offered. We're just creating a protected portion, which is a guaranteed annuity portfolio, which is a new component inside an existing living annuity. So the contract is still one contract. It's still a living annuity contract, but inside of there, you protect a piece of your income.
Are there a percentage split or a minimum that you can put or maximum that you can put into the
Yes, so you can blend these two however you like. So somebody can come in, very nice feature, you can go 100% into growth and nothing into protected portion. And a year or two from now, you can actually decide, I actually want to put a piece into my protected portion, right? We do have certain product minimums. We don't want you to go more than 80% into the guaranteed annuity portfolio, because then we think it makes more sense for that client to go 100% into a guaranteed annuity portfolio. So we want to give you that option of protecting one piece of your income, so you get certainty on a portion, and then you get all the flexibility that's normally associated with a living annuity, and all the opportunity for, if markets do better, there's still that growth opportunity that you could want exposure to, and you continue to have that in the growth portion. And that growth portion, you can still invest in unit trusts, in personal share portfolios, in model portfolios, in all the rest. The other, and I think what is important is that blending depends on person to person. So I think this next slide shows it quite nicely. It's if you think about your life expenses that I spoke about, which is the expenses that you actually can't do without, that portion should ideally be met by the protected portion by investing in a guaranteed annuity portfolio. Whereas your living expenses and your need to leave an inheritance could then be met by the growth portion. So that balance really is obviously going to be up to each individual client. It depends how much you saved, how many other assets you have, are you still working or not. But in general, your life expenses should be met by a guaranteed annuity portfolio, your living expenses by a growth portion. Now, I want to share something that when we started to talk about this to the advisors, they actually started saying you can think so differently about your inheritance. Because if you have a joint life annuity, it means that you then secure your spouse by giving her an income, and you use the capital from your growth assets as an inheritance for your children. So it starts to provide very different ways of even thinking about a need such as inheritance than what we did previously.
I'll be honest, I haven't thought about it that way. It's really nice.
It's interesting, right? Yes. Sorry.
So is it a lump sum that you contribute and then of that lump sum is protected? Or say for instance I'm 32 and I'm about to retire at 65 and I wanted to invest in this product, how would it work for me? Obviously my salary income would hopefully increase as I got a bit older, so I'd maybe want the protected portion to increase and to be a higher payout when I retire. How does that work?
Fareeya, can I take that one, because it's actually going to help you position a latter part of the presentation. I'm going to relate this exactly to the case study that we're going to be running now.
Sorry.
No, but it's good because you know it helps you get into the right frame of mind how it works. So let's imagine you get to the age of 65 or whenever you retire, and you've got a 2 million rand investment, okay, that you're going to be buying an income product with. The first case study what we're going to do is a person just buying a pure living annuity, okay, as per normal. The second case study could potentially be your instance that you're asking for, to say, I'm going to now look at my life and my living expenses, and I'm going to try and allocate 35% of that 2 million rand to a guaranteed annuity portfolio to cover part of my life expenses. You can allocate as much as you want. You can see that you're taking a part of that lump sum, and some of that goes into a market-related funds that gives you upside when markets do well, and a part goes into a guaranteed annuity portfolio. In our example, it's going to be 35% to give you that security for the remainder of your life.
But what I also heard you asking something about who is this directed to. So what is important is that the client saves this money in a pre-retirement product, right? So in South African environment, that's a retirement annuity or pension fund or preservation fund. And then at the point of retirement, you have to annuitize. And the annuitized amount must go into what they call an approved income product. Now, both of these are approved income products. Okay, so it's that choice at retirement. Then if you just to cover a little bit about our product features, what is interesting about ours is that it's one contract. So you don't split your money up, make that decision, and then manage two contracts on the side away from each other. You actually combine them. It's one contract, one proposal process, one application process, one statement, and you receive one income. So that is quite a big feature of our product. And as I mentioned, it's for new and existing retirement income option clients. Retirement income option, if you hear me say that, it's just Momentum's version of a living annuity. That's all. It's just our product name. But the point is that when you go into a living annuity, as I mentioned today, if somebody retires into our living annuity, they can at any point in time from here on decide to allocate a portion of their money into a guaranteed annuity portfolio and then protect that portion of income. And it's a switch instruction. The way that you can choose to switch between a balanced fund and a more conservative fund over time, you switch it to a guaranteed annuity portfolio. Equally important, it's also open to all of our existing living annuity clients. So if 3 years ago somebody came into our living annuity, they now also have this option. And they can decide really when do they want to go into this product, when do they want to protect, how much do they want to protect. And I think that's quite a nice feature because it's not a new product aimed at new clients, it's a new solution aimed at all retired clients. All right. Now this is probably the nicest part for us, right? It's because what does this really mean? So it's beautiful features, it's lovely features, but when we really got into the analysis, we started to see what impact does this have on real people and real clients, and what can it be? And there's three points that I want to mention: enhanced advice opportunities, diversification, and achieving a successful retirement. And Martiens will then, in that last one, actually share a lot of his analysis. If we start with enhanced advice opportunities. So currently what happens in a life annuity, if somebody just takes out a straightforward life annuity, the advisor is involved in that decision and then the relationship ends. right? He says, well, I've now applied you, you're receiving your 7,000 or 10,000 rands a month, that's it. There's no further engagement, right? What this structure allows, it allows you to bring all of that into one contract, and therefore for your advisor to continue to be involved in the client's life, because on a living annuity there's ongoing advice fees. On a life annuity there's no ongoing advice fees. On a living annuity there's ongoing advice, so an ongoing relationship between an advisor and his client. Now, financial advice is not only about what product do you go into. Financial advice is about how you manage your budget. It's about having a conversation with the client and saying, look, inflation is a lot higher than what we expect. Returns are lower than what we expect. Can we make sure that you manage your budget appropriately? Now is a good time. Mr. Client, now is a good time for us to protect some of your income. Let's decide how much to protect. So I think that that ongoing advice can have quite a big impact on the life of a client versus just, okay, now you're receiving your income, what you do with it is up to you. That's one big thing. I mentioned the risk sharing and decisions, making these decisions at the suitable time already. The next one is about diversification. I just want to see what slides I have on here. So diversification is important. So if you guys think about asset classes currently, what do we think about? We think about equities that are high risk and potentially high reward. And we think about property. We think about bonds. Now when you introduce a guaranteed annuity portfolio as one of your components, you actually have to see a new asset class. It's not a bond fund. It's not an equity fund. It's not a property. It's not a cash portfolio. What it is, it's a new asset class because it's an insurance portfolio. It's an insurance product. You are insuring your risk with an insurance company. And the return profile on that is dependent on two important things. First thing being, when you go in, you lock into a guaranteed return, right? The company is not going to change that. You lock into a guaranteed return. And secondly, very importantly, how long does that client live? And generally in an insurance contract, the longer a life annuity contract, the longer that client lives, the higher the return. So do you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask about the guaranteed annuities. So on the here it says the major benefits of this offering is that it provides a client with all protection called options in one kind solution. So I just wanted to find out, does it have any restrictions?
Can I come to that in a few minutes? I think it's just the 80%, but I'll come to that just now. Okay. I just want to touch on this. So when we did some analysis, we found that typical case study that Martiens also mentioned, we're using the same case study across to give you to be for consistency. A client will receive his money back in a life annuity after 10 years. Right? Thereafter, every 2 to 3 years, he receives his capital back. So much so that if a 65-year-old in our case study lived till age 95, which is very possible these days, right? He'll receive 5 times his capital back. And that translates into a 12% return. If you look at the returns that are currently available in investment markets, 12% is a good return. And it's guaranteed, right? I mentioned a guarantee term just now. So obviously, if you can imagine that I say very clearly, okay, after 10 years, you receive 100%. A client who goes into a life annuity and dies within 3 or 4 years obviously doesn't receive that money back. He's going to receive less than his capital back. And that's often, it's a valid point, right? And that's where the guarantee term comes in. Because if somebody adds a 20-year guarantee term to their contract, it means that they lock into receiving 2.5 times their capital back, right? And that is a guaranteed return currently of around 9.3% over a 20-year period. So those are all, I mean, it's an asset class that you actually can't ignore. It's an asset class that you have to bring in terms just of the return that it can offer to a client. And that's why we talk about a diversification benefit, because it's different. It's not the same as investing in 2 balanced funds, and then your diversification actually could be a little bit worse than what you started with. And a further important point now, guys, when we initially presented this, let's go on back. You must stop me when it starts to get too weird, right? Or a bit technical. We talk about a medium equity strategy. If you have retirement income clients, a medium equity strategy is generally a good strategy. So just look on the left-hand side on the blue block at the moment, right? Medium equity strategy, 100% in that, that's a reasonable strategy for a retired client because they don't want to take too much risk. Of that, 56% allocated to growth assets. Growth assets defined here as property, and equity exposure. And they say 44% in less risky asset classes, so you have some exposure to growth, but you're not overly exposed from a risk perspective. Now, what happens if a client changes that allocation and adds in 35% into a guaranteed annuity portfolio? So he decides, I actually want to protect 35% of my income. I'm going to put 35% in this new guaranteed annuity portfolio, which is a different asset class, and I keep a medium equity strategy on the balance. Now remember, the total risk on that contract is a function of the weighted average between those two. What we find is that the exposure to growth assets drops to 36%, which means that for that client, this is probably a very conservative asset strategy now. He's protected, he's got this protection now that can potentially give him those great returns, but actually the risk that he's taking is much, much lower. Now a client can either decide to stay there, or he can decide that I'm actually going to go with a high equity strategy with 65% of my money. My guaranteed annuity portfolio is still 35%, and so overall, I'm more or less where I was to start with. The first number that we saw there on the medium equity was 56. This is now 52, so they're more or less the same. So by protecting this, even though you've got the high growth potential of a high equity strategy, you have the same amount of risk. So that can be quite powerful in terms of how an advisor starts to think together with his client about asset allocation and exposure to risk and exposure to growth assets. So this is the diversification benefit that we actually were quite excited about. And finally, it's about achieving a successful retirement. So what is success in retirement? It's probably different for every single one of us, right? And a lot of it depends on how much you save. If you're very high net worth, success in retirement, if you have a lot of money, then success in retirement says, I have to put this money in an improved income product, so I'll put it in a living annuity and draw the minimum amount possible because I want to maximize my inheritance. That is one type of client. But for most clients, the average client, all of us here, we're going to save towards retirement, and what we want is to be certain, number one, that we'll be able to receive an income that can cover the expenses we need to cover. Number two, that it keeps pace with inflation. And most importantly, that it doesn't run out during our lifetime. Because I think that's the worst thing. Because remember that if your income runs out when you're 85 years old, shucks, there's very, very little that you can do about it. Right? You does become a negative inheritance. So those are the three things that define a successful retirement. And the reason we are mostly excited about this product is because the analysis shows that using a guaranteed annuity portfolio as one of your components increases your chances of successful retirement. And Martiens is actually going to explain how that happens.
Thank you, Fareeya. So, did I go forward now? I think we're fine. Ah, right. So, success in retirement. I think there's two main things that, if you've saved enough, that can really contribute, or that can put you in a position that you don't have a successful retirement. The one is negative market returns, and I'm talking about long-term negative market returns, not a blip like COVID. And then also, longevity. If you live to the age of 85 and 90, 95, 100, you really need to have saved enough for retirement. So there's two main risks there. And we think about it this way in the white paper. So the living annuity risk spiral thinks about it this way. So clients have longevity risk. No one of us knows how long we're going to be living in retirement. Sorry for my back here. But because you need to live long, you really need to get that fund value of yours to grow. Because, for every R1 million you have there, you might have to be withdrawing 3, 4, 5 million rand from that pot. So that pot really needs to grow over time. Okay. So that forces clients to take on market risk so that they can enhance their returns. And now that they've taken on that higher market risk, because they are really reliant on markets performing, but that means there is additional client risk in their portfolio, especially in the short term. And I think Paul can jump in any time, because we need to talk about how clients react in that journey as well. All right. But then when markets do underperform, that sometimes happen, you might get into that situation where you now have these two risks converging. Markets didn't perform well, and you are living for a very long time in retirement. And that really puts you into that situation of negative inheritance. You're really dependent on your kids, and no one wants to be there. So we really truly believe that with the solution, you can reverse that spiral by introducing a life annuity, or as we call it, a guaranteed annuity portfolio. So by introducing that, the first thing that happens is you're reducing your longevity risk, because this guaranteed annuity portfolio will forever and a day pay income to yourself as long as you stay alive. So it really reduces the longevity risk. Okay? And that basically reduces the level of negative inheritance that you can have over time, depending on how much you've allocated, obviously, to the guaranteed annuity portfolio. Okay? This point there at the bottom, it reduces your reliance on market returns. I want to maybe exaggerate or talk a little bit more about that. Fareeya has already mentioned it, is that the longer you live while you have a life annuity, the more of your capital is returned to you. Okay, so if I buy a life annuity and for R1 million or whatever goes into that life annuity, if I die after 1 month, I've only received 1 month of income. But what happens if I live to 95, 100 years? In that instance, if I've put R1 million in over my lifetime, I can very easily have been returned 6 million rand, or for that R1 million that I've given. That could equate to a return in excess of 12%. So people that's buying into a life annuity, they might live for 3 decades in retirement with markets, it could do very well, it could do very badly, who knows. But at least with this, they've got that assurance that they're getting the bang for their buck from the guaranteed annuity portfolio, irrespective of what happens in the markets. And then lastly, you've got a reduced market risk, because obviously the money that's in that guaranteed annuity portfolio, you're not concerned what happens in the markets. You've got that guaranteed income that's paying from the life insurer for the remainder of your life, and you can just sit back and relax. Not have any worries about it.
So Martiens, you gave me the look.
I gave you the look there.
Okay, so yeah, I think the kind of what I'd like to bring to this discussion is, the last time we were in this room, I think it was in February this year. I see some familiar faces. We were talking about the Sci-Fi report, which was all about kind of the investment in unit trusts, right? So it's people, everyday South Africans who invest in unit trusts and what their behavior in those unit trusts are, and if they create something called a behavior tax. So just a refresher for those of you who'd like a refresher on that. Behavior tax is if you're invested in Fund A and you move to Fund B, we continue to track Fund A, and if obviously Fund A does better at the end of the day, you incur a behavior tax because you should have stayed. That's the theoretical sort of buy and hold portfolio. So what we actually wanted to do was we wanted to figure out, or rather investigate, the kind of market-linked portion that we're talking about here, the living annuity product. We wanted to investigate and see if investors were incurring this behavior tax in living annuities, and if so, what the extent thereof was. And the results were pretty bad. So in a living annuity portfolio in the retirement income options, that's the market-linked portion. That's people buying living annuities and exposing their capital to markets. Behavior tax was actually far worse than the flexible investment option or the unit trust, the kind of vanilla unit trust investments. So some of the highlights of that, in 2021, people in living annuity products incurred over a 4% behavior tax. So over 4% in value lost per investment switch. Since COVID, investors have destroyed over R500 million in living annuities in South Africa that they've lost in their retirement capital from moving money around. So there's one other thing that I think is very interesting. I'm not going to go into the different archetypes. I think in Feb this year we talked about the different archetypes, but I want to zoom in on one of them because it's very interesting. So by far the majority of the people or archetypes that we conducted using machine learning, archetypes just give behavioral patterns, right? So what are people likely to do, or what are their risk preferences in retirement? And we saw that the biggest group in living annuities were anxious investors. Okay, so over half of the population belong to the anxious investor archetype. What does that mean? It means that predominantly these people, number one, is they actually don't mind taking risks. So we call them anxious, but they're very happy to take risk. Now, if we think about that for a second, that more than half of the population are anxious investors not minding to take risk, it kind of says something about how people are entering retirement. They're happy to take risk in retirement, which means that they might not be saving enough, right? So they might be forced to transfer that risk onto markets. If you don't save enough, you might have to actually take or buy more risky assets in retirement. That's the first thing. The second thing is that these people, generally speaking, don't mind taking risk, but the minute there's market volatility, they run for safety. So they often de-risk their portfolios, and they often move into investments with worse past performance. Worse past performance, why would you do that? It's normally cash. So backward-looking equities generally perform better than cash. So if you're switching to cash, it looks like you're switching to something with worse past performance, right? So the interesting thing about that is that sort of, it seems as though the majority of people go into retirement are happy taking risk, but the behavior that sort of comes with that is that when markets sort of wobble, like during COVID, for example, they're running for the hills, and the problem with that is they get stuck in those safe assets. So they don't come back to markets. And I mean, we've seen sort of during COVID as well, I mean, within 3 months, markets are completely recovered. So it seems that investors didn't have those kind of structures in place, or the correct structures in place with their financial advisors. And this is definitely, I think, it could be a very, very good solution to that, because you're creating more of a certainty in that retirement structure, which means that even if you have that behavioural proclivity, if I call it that, to move to safety, because you've got a different sort of payoff structure in your retirement, it could actually help you get through that journey a little bit better. So that's just some of the insights that we've seen, from the archetype analysis, and also the very big amount of value that was destroyed, from COVID and also post-COVID. Because remember, at the moment, what's happening is markets are just going up and down and up and down and up and down. And when people try and move in time with that, it's never a good idea, actually. So those are just some of the behavioural insights we've seen in the retirement income option, which is the market-linked portion that Martiens was talking and Fareeya was talking.
Oh, Paul, I think the interesting thing, we haven't measured it yet, but we should expect that people that has the security of a guaranteed annuity portfolio, they would probably be less affected by behavioral tax, because once you have that certainty, you're probably going to be less stressful to make snap decisions on, I need to do this or do that. So something to think about, but let's wait a few years and let the science determine whether we are actually right.
Because what the guaranteed annuity portfolio does is it almost puts a floor. So even if your income does fall, or even if your market values do fall, there's almost this floor, and you know that that's the amount of income you will receive. And if that can cover your life expenses, then that's actually a great protection mechanism for clients. You can actually have a lot more leeway with the rest.
But I think sort of the general overarching theme here is, I think, sort of from a almost like a customer behavior point of view, people need to save more. Because the more you save, the more of these kind of strategies you can actually employ in your portfolio, as opposed to getting to retirement thinking, geez, I sort of almost have to go invest as risky as possible to sort of get any money out of this. So yeah, interesting insights.
So I'm going to go into the last few slides of our discussion today. This is part of the white paper that we'll distribute to you in the next day or two. Might be a little bit technical, but I'm really going to try and make it as simple as possible. And I'm just quickly going to rehash that case study that we did. And the names actually relate back to the video that we saw earlier, and we're going to be talking about Greg and Gina. Okay, so Greg, the game ranger, he likes to take on a little bit of risk. He's now a little bit older. He's at the age of 65. He's got 2 million rand that he's going to invest, and he's very comfortable to go into a living annuity. He's going to use a medium risk portfolio. Okay, so he's not going full out equity, but he's also not shying away from the market. And to be honest, let's quickly think about what is Greg's risk. Greg's risk is, even though he still only has exposure to the market in a medium risk portfolio, he won't have that severe turndowns when markets go south. There's still market risk. Markets need to perform for Greg's assets to grow. And Greg needs, if Greg lives to a very high age, he might also run into risk, the normal retirement risks. Because I want to skip over this slide. And this is now a simulation that we've done. We've run 2,000 simulations that sort of reflect what we believe could happen in markets. And the first one I'm going to show you is not a great simulation of markets doing very well. It's just to prove a point. Okay, we're going to go into all 2000 right now. But this is like your 4 out of 10 simulation. So this is great market performance, and this is terrible market performance, and we're right there. So in this instance, Greg wants to, he needs quite a high return to fulfill on his needs, because it's personal. You spoke about, Fareeya, you spoke about people that have enough saved, they don't have to take on risk. But in Greg's instance, he needs to take on some risk for what he needs. That means markets need to perform well for him to get his outcome. In this instance, we saw the markets, this is what he needs, okay? And markets does reasonably well, and this is actually the income that he would receive under this simulation. Okay, so you can see here, I'm going to stand now, that in the initial years, the living annuity can actually pay the income that he needs, okay? And that's the interesting thing about the risk in retirement. It doesn't transpire immediately. It takes quite a while for you to start running out of capital that you can't maintain your standard of living, okay? And I think people are also, your consumable, your lifestyle is your lifestyle. People don't really want to bump back too much, okay? So in this instance, at about age of 84, his fund value is just starting to become a little bit too, it's starting to deplete, and the income that he can get in retirement starts to deplete. So it all now depends on how long Greg would live. This is like a future view of what could happen, okay? And now a bit of a tricky one. This was one simulation. You'll see it's green, and then it turns into yellow, and then it turns into red. So now we're saying he lives for a short period of time in retirement, or he lives for a long period of time in retirement. And let me quickly explain to you what we've done here. Okay, 2000 simulations all shown on one screen. Okay, what you can see here, when Greg retires, you will be able to get an income. Okay, if markets do very well, okay, that's the top part of the graph, it means Greg is fine. He can live to the age of 100, no problem. Markets played along, he lives long, he gets his income. But once market starts to do badly, which can happen, there's an uncertainty, okay? You can see that in extreme cases, you can actually start to run out of income quite quickly, because we said in this example that Greg needs a lot of income from his life living annuity, okay? Now, yellow means his income is starting to fall below 50%, red means, below 100%, and red means his income starts to fall below 50%. So we can see here at the age of 85, Greg, I'm just going to shoot from the hip, got about 60% chance to get his full income, but there is about a 30% chance that he's really going to be in a place where he might have negative inheritance, and things aren't going very well. Obviously, he can do things in the interim. We've assumed here that he never cuts his lifestyle. He tries to maintain that lifestyle. It's not always such a big picture, but this is just for the sake of the analysis, he tries to take that full income. Okay, now we bring in Gina. Okay, Gina has allocated 35% of her 2 million rand into a guaranteed annuity portfolio. Okay, that 35% isn't exposed to the market. It's just, it depends, the value that she gets depends on how long she lives. She lives till the age of 95, 100. She basically gets a 12 to 13% return guaranteed, okay? Which is really going to help when she lives long and when markets don't perform well. It's really here where the guaranteed annuity portfolio brings something else to the table. And why we're so excited about it is not all investment companies in the industry has the ability to bring this to clients. They still need to fish in the same pool of assets and need to use shares, bonds, property, and offshore investments to try and solve this problem. We as a life insurance company can bring something else to the table. So you can see here that the same situation, but now it's a reasonable returning market. Okay, obviously, if it's the best performing market, you want to be in a pure living annuity without a gap, but no one knows. Okay. In this instance, this is the guaranteed annuity income that would be paid to Gina. Covers a large part already, and there you can see this is what would happen to Gina. She would still get the full income for quite a while, and when it starts to deplete, she never gets into that place where she can't pay her life expenses. Okay, it's one scenario. Okay, but I just want to bring a point across about how it can help. If we look at that full simulation again, with all 2,000 simulations of how we think the world could play out, this is the analysis you can see. You can see here that in the worst case scenarios for Greg, here from about 65, you start to see a likelihood that things can go bad. But for Gina, that is pushed out by about 11 years until you have in the region of about a 1% chance of running into serious trouble. I think the long and short of it is, if retirement is about protecting your income, a life annuity used as an asset class in your living annuity can really help you maintain a standard of living when things go wrong in the markets or when you live for a very long time. That's the main attributes, and I think that's the conclusion I would certainly like to leave you with. The two main retirement risks are market risks. It is longevity risk. We can also talk about inflation risks, but you can always put in an inflation-linked life annuity to cover that risk. Let's keep it simple for today. Your two main risks can really be hedged or mitigated by using a life annuity as an asset class in your living annuity. And again, I'm saying in the worst case scenarios, when markets really do terrible, we can help you sustain an income by another 10 years in retirement.
So we summarize it sometimes. We say that it's important, as Paul mentioned, for people to save and to save more, right? So it's not a magic bullet that says, oh, you haven't saved enough, we can now offer you the world and we'll ensure that you can meet your expenses in retirement. It's not about that. What we are saying is that using the guaranteed annuity portfolio has two effects. Number one, your income will start to fall later in the worst scenarios. And number two, it will fall less. So it will still fall. I mean, it could still fall. You could still have the yellow and the red lines. But it will happen later and it will happen less. And that's important.
I think we can definitely open the floor to questions.
Yeah, okay.
I think you just mentioned something now on why you were able to do it. Why isn't everybody on?
Okay, so pure asset, you need a life insurance license to offer a life annuity. I think that's point number one. So this opportunity is only available to life insurance companies. Yeah.
Or a loan provider, platform provider, or provider of living annuities has to partner with someone that has a life insurance license. So when I quickly want to answer the question in the back, it's what are the restrictions? I mentioned that we have a product restriction that says a maximum of 80% in a guaranteed annuity portfolio, and the minimum amount that you can put into a guaranteed annuity portfolio is 50,000.
I have a question about the level of education. I mean, this is quite complex, and we are relatively a little bit go to school a little bit. So I'm curious about the conversations you're having and how this is being received. How are you able to break this down? And just in general, what is the industry? How does the industry look like? What is the sense of the landscape?
Okay, so for few important points. Number one, we generally distribute these products through financial advisors. So because it is complicated and because there are all of these different factors to take into account, it is important that a financial advisor should help a client to make these decisions. This is not a product ever that, at this stage at least, that we would think of just releasing it out there and say that people can take it up on their own. I think it is too complicated and you need support, right? Secondly, all of this analysis, I think we're pitching to you because it's thought leadership, right? It's not necessarily what you can tell to a client, but you can help an advisor to know how to use it. So somebody can understand, what does this really mean? So we like this, and it is very technical, agree, but it's not meant for client consumption. I think the 2 points that I mentioned right in the end, which is why we summarize it like that, is to say that you can reduce your risk of your income falling. It falls later and it falls less. I think that's perhaps something that a client can perhaps interact with. But I don't think we're ever in a situation where we'll put simulations in front of a client. I think that's,
I can imagine someone.
yes, it's very complicated.
NCE, whatever, vote for independence, and then then you tell them, oh yeah, actually, I don't know how you'd have this discussion.
Yeah, I think.
But can you tell me about the landscape? What does it look like in terms of like retirement in South Africa, and how you guys have a vantage point of what's going on in the industry? Okay. With a young population, obviously, I'm sure there's none of that trouble that Germany and Japan have. But what does it look like? With the economy as it is, unemployment being what it is, what does it look like?
So what we were quite surprised by over the COVID period, I think that we saw, so you're talking pre and post-retirement, I'm assuming, right? You're not only you're talking retirement landscape as a whole. Yeah. Okay. So retirement landscape as a whole, I think we all know South Africans are poor savers. It's a general trend that we have, we don't save, right? We've got new legislation that's tried to actually influence. They called it retirement reform. It came into effect a year or two back, and they're trying to encourage it. But actually, we're still not preserving enough. So people, when they leave their employment, they can still take that whole amount and leave. They are not forced to preserve. So I do think that we do have that difficulty in South Africa. We have people that are not preserving enough and people who are not saving enough. Now, next year, there's new legislation, new proposals, you guys have probably heard about it, where they actually want to give some sort of access to retirement annuity clients. And that, I think, can actually help people to save, because one of the difficulties today is that people go into a retirement annuity. There's great tax benefits, lots of tax benefits to that in terms of deductibility, in terms of tax-free growth, but you can never get your money out, right? And I think that does put certain people off, because they know they can benefit from the tax, but they're so worried that if they put their money in their shucks, what happens if I have an emergency and I need access to it? And I think some of the new legislation that is preserved can actually help to align the playing fields a little bit more, and that could encourage more people to save, right? But at this stage, that's not what's happening. We do see on the retirement income side, so we have mentioned those statistics of the 90-10 versus the 70-30. So we think that people are becoming more aware of it, and they are actually investing more in products that give them certainty. I think the market is reaching a point where it's not growing the way that it should. Not as us, as South Africa, I think we need to save more.
And can you, sorry if anyone has questions, but can you give us any indication about the people who take lump sum, the people who probably annuitize?
So remember that that's a legal requirement. Okay. So if you're in a retirement annuity or the old pension preservation funds, you could take at most a third as a lump sum and 2/3 you have to use to annuitize. So you can't annuitize less than 2/3.
Right.
Now with the retirement reform regulations that came in last year, they also starting to push that towards provident fund members. Previously, provident fund members, they contribute to a provident fund. At retirement, they can take the full amount in cash. They were not required to annuitize at all. Now, from last year, all your contributions before the regulation came in, you can take as a lump sum. All the contributions after that 1 March 2020, last year, 2021, all of the contributions post that, you have the same rules as the retirement annuity and pension fund. You can take up to 1/3 as a lump sum, the rest has to be annuitized. So it's regulation that drives that.
I'll maybe add one thing onto that. I'll say something quite controversial, right? So financial education has failed. It doesn't work. And the reason for that simply is that if you look at it from a behavioural science point of view, knowledge is not the problem. Telling people that they need to save more is not the problem. Everyone wants more money in retirement. Everyone wants a brighter future for their children. But the thing is, people struggle to bridge their intentions with their actions. So, everyone wants a flat screen TV now, but we also want to retire with more money. So So things like behavioral science, I think, are a very important way of getting people to bridge their intention with their actions, and it's been shown. There's been a study done a couple of years ago that showed one group of people were just exposed to financial education, so benefits of compound interest, benefits of retirement annuities. Their savings, another group of people was exposed to cognitive behavioral therapy. So people sat down with these people and said, can you imagine yourself in retirement? Can you tell me what car you think you're going to drive? Can you tell me what kind of house you're going to have? So they spent time, work. So from a cognitive behavioral therapy point of view, identifying with their future selves, they increased savings by 3 times more than the financial education side. They actually even gave these people totems to, like, you know, kind of something to carry in their pocket. Like every time you go to McDonald's, remember this thing in your pocket. You've committed not, you know, to not eating less takeout because you're going to drive a better car in retirement. You know, so I think that sort of the world needs to change. We're moving to an empathy economy. People are looking towards psychology to solve human problems, not economics anymore. Right? So I think that kind of that sort of shift that we're seeing is going to help address those kinds of problems.
And just to add to that, so one key question is, who's going to pay your salary in retirement? We don't have defined benefits in South Africa anymore, right? Your employer, when I leave Momentum, they're not paying me an income. I've accumulated savings, I have to pay myself. And that's a penny that has to drop people, is to realize that your retirement, who pays you in retirement is yourself. And if you don't save enough now, you won't be able to pay yourself that salary anymore. And then what happens? And I think that when it becomes, to Paul's point, it's not about the financial stuff. It's about realizing that you're responsible for that. And if you fail in that, the person who's really going to struggle is you. So I think when people start to make those connections of realizing that you don't do it, you're not doing it for somebody else's benefit, you're doing it to benefit your own future self. And when those pennies start to drop, then hopefully we'll see a change in behavior.
But look, to talk about not just the accumulation phase, but people that's at retirement, that needs to look at a retirement product now. I think the reality is they're sitting unprotected. They are, where you would take an asset, if you take your car, you would insure your car. You wouldn't just drive your car around. People that are not currently fully protecting, or at least a large portion of the investors aren't protecting their retirement income. They're really putting it out there, and it's market forces that's going to influence whether you're going to get a long-term income. It depends on how long you're going to live, or you could potentially run out of money. And what we're trying to do here is to say, we can bring a level of protection to your retirement income by incorporating a different type of asset into the way you do your planning when you reach retirement. And I think, basically, it's almost like an insurance on your retirement income.
Sorry, the comment was just, I know we don't save enough, but obviously we're talking about people who are working. The unemployment is a different ballgame. But I just want to ask you, kind of, I don't know if it's just for example's sake that you refer to 1 million or 2 million, is that average? Because why do you keep on mentioning those figures? If somebody has, for instance, 1 million or 2 million, you haven't gone anything beyond that. Is that what people have in general?
I think the average that people use to annuitize is 1.5.
Yes.
Sure. 1.5 million. It's very low.
And then
I just want to ask, Fareeya, is that like the size of the investment or the size of the combined wealth? That's
the size of the investment into the income product.
No, they might
so we have no context of what they have outside of that, really. But what we see, look, you get those that are obviously much higher. You do get the people that come in with 8 and 10 million, but the average is what it is.
The US at $77,000, so it's not that different. So.
But they.
But obviously, you say you're living your inflation. It's a different.
It's a bit of a different ballgame. Yeah.
And then I know I'm supposed to know this, but I don't. How long do you have to make a decision when you retire? I mean, you can keep the money in your fund for a while. How long?
Yes, you can. I don't think there's restrictions on that. Right?
Okay.
It's when you retire out of that fund.
Okay.
That you use it to receive income. And that depends very often on the rules of the particular fund that you're in. Yeah. So our retirement annuity, for example, the pre-retirement one, doesn't have a rule that says you must retire at age 55 or 60 or 65. You can decide at which point you want to retire. The work schemes, your employee sponsored schemes generally are a bit different. But then you can always preserve, so not too much restriction.
I would like to find out, so this question is to Paul. So how does the new retirement system from South Africa, how would it affect the behavior and the shift in investment?
Yeah, so I think the big thing there is helping financial advisors or equipping them to have different conversations with the clients. So in the past, it's all about sort of income statements and balance sheets, right? There's been very little attention paid on how the client got to the income statement and the balance sheet. So, if you're not going to pay attention to how the client got to that position, not saving enough, for example, you're not going to address the behavior. Telling stuff at people doesn't work, right? You can tell a person that they're spending too much money on a car, it doesn't matter. They might be getting something from it. So the way that the industry is moving in the CFP syllabus, which is obviously the professional standard for financial planners, psychology is now a part of that syllabus. So you need to understand and be able to understand the principles of counseling, right? So counseling people, right? So I mean, if you want to have a great discussion with a partner, husband, wife, whatever, write down your top 5 things like your values and write them on little post-its and then kind of match them up, right? If there are big differences, in other words, if your number 1 is her number 5 or his number 5, you're going to have problems. You're going to have conflict. So without understanding those very, very simple techniques, it's very difficult to change financial behavior and to get people to do better stuff. So that is the way it has to change.
I want to add something. So we believe in Momentum, we believe in the power of advice. I know you all know that. But it's also, that's part of the why we go through advisors, is exactly to have those coaching sessions. So we have the products, but they have to have the tools to have the discussions. For example, somebody passes away, you inherit money. You don't go into a conversation, oh, thank you, what can we do with your money? You have to acknowledge where the person is. First, condolences and are you fine? Because people can't make decisions in that time. So all of this is part of providing the advisors with the tools and the products to give the right advice to the clients in the end.
I'm curious, you launched this at the event that you held.
That's right, Wealth Matters, yes.
Yeah. How has the uptake been?
We've already seen people starting to use it. So what's quite encouraging for me is that we're seeing new clients coming in, choosing a portion of their money, and we've also seen a few switches on the existing living annuity book where people are going in. The thing that was quite encouraging for me is the split. Is you see small amounts going in there, contracts that are 300,000, and then you see the 8 and 10 millions also going in there. So it's quite wide. It obviously hasn't been very long. It's just a month or 6 weeks, so there isn't a lot of data yet. But we've already seen people going in. There are already people that have traded and are receiving a guaranteed income.
Any more questions? Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Renee and team, for this event. If you want to engage or get in touch with anybody, you're welcome to speak to Charles, MSL, or to Billy or myself. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.